everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. Right now, it's the day before Thanksgiving. You'll hear this recording after Thanksgiving, but we're moving into the holiday season. And I'm super happy and looking forward to my interview with Jock Brocas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then he'll tell you more about himself. But it's going to be extremely relevant to people who are dealing with grief going into the holidays. So, Jock Brocas is an evidential medium, a spiritual interventionist, an author of a few books, one of them being Deadly Departed, The Do's, Don'ts, and Dangers of Afterlife Communication. Jock is the host of the Pillars of Grief podcast, Understanding the Grieving Journey. And Jock talks about a lot of things related to grief. He dispels some myths. He talks about when grief goes on for too long and is complicated and when you might need professional help, among other things. He talks about how to stay connected to loved ones who have passed on, including our beloved pets. And without further ado, Jock, I'm going to let you tell more about your story, but welcome.
Thank you, Traci. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for this opportunity to share with you, and hopefully, let your listeners come away with something that may help them this season. There's very little to tell about me. I mean, you've done a fantastic job. Other than I'm a very spiritual person. I've been very spiritual ever since I was young. My uncle was a monk in a monastery. I spent most of my youth in and out of that monastery. And then at one point, I decided that I wanted to take holy orders and become a priest. And my uncle passed. So, I've been intimately acquainted with grief ever since I was young, ever since I was a child. And they told me to take a sabbatical and then come back later. But instead, I took a sabbatical and I joined the British Army and I became a soldier. So I'm an ex-veteran. And so I've dealt with grief all of my life, from personal losses and even recently this year, a number of losses, and dealing with losses from people in the military and all sorts of things. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you, especially at this time.
Thank you so much. And it's so interesting because so many people who have dealt with a lot of grief, because it's not evenly distributed in the population. There are people who get, even into their 30s and say, I've never had a significant loss, and people who've had so many. But it really kind of makes us want to, I think, be of service to heal our own grief and help people with theirs. I want to ask you, you are an evidential medium.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to explain to listeners what that is. I know what that is, but it's really important. Not everybody does mediumship the same way.
No.
So if you could talk about how you got started in mediumship and your training in evidential mediumship, what that means for people who come to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I'd love to do that. Firstly, I would say that my work in grief, although it overlaps into mediumship, it is not primarily that focus, because as we go on, you'll find out that there's so much more to grief than just connecting with. But as I mentioned before, I've been very spiritual ever since I was a young person. And later in life, I had experiences that I couldn't understand. My very first experience was when I identified a spirit in the monastery that later turned out to be that I could identify by image and by picture. It later turned out to be a priest or a monk that had passed in the 1800s or something. So, I mean, it was, and then I had all the lectures, and I was brought up a Catholic, and so I had a kind of religious fervor thrown at me, whereas this is evil. And rather than it frighten me, it intrigued me more, and I went on a whole kind of research spree. But I suppose, through my life, even in the military, I had a lot of experiences that I would never be able to, there's a bit of a cliche where people will say, I've always been psychic since I was young. I was born like this. I was gifted like this. And I don't really like that, because in reality, we couldn't label it. We didn't know what it was. And we had these experiences that some people would think were out of the normal, but to me, they were normal. So it wasn't until later in life that I was able to then kind of put that square shape in the square hole and the round shape in the round hole, because there's a lot of experiences in life that we have to go through. And so my work as a medium has been developed through my desire to be of service. I think it was the next best thing for me being a priest. If I couldn't be a priest then, I'd be able to use the gifts, or I won't use the gifts, but the skills that I developed, or the abilities that I had developed over the years. I trained in a home circle and also in a spiritualist church, and my wife was my greatest teacher, who's still my greatest teacher. I always say that she took a piece of coal and made it into a diamond, and from then
we
on
all
in,
do that, by the way.
Behind
it's in the handbook.
Behind every man, there's a good woman behind, and she really is. She really has been my rock, and a very accomplished medium in her own right. And so we eventually we had our own church in Scotland. I became a spiritualist minister, and developed through the years, sitting in circle and developing and demonstrating in churches and places like that. So, but I'm also very focused academically and scientifically. So I then, as you know, I'm on an academic path just now, and I like to bring that into my mediumistic work and my research in grief and spiritual crisis. So
talk about your academic path, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
because I want people to know that you're coming at this from multiple angles.
Oh, absolutely. There's a big thing where people think about, this a medium as somebody who maybe reads a tarot or speaks to the dead, and I kind of don't like that. I'm very evidential focused. So it's got to be empirical, and it's got to stand up to scrutiny, scientific scrutiny. And the other thing is that when I was delving into research and research work myself, I wasn't really getting taken seriously without really having a kind of academic background. And I remember a friend of mine, Dr. Richard Gallagher, who wrote a book. You know Richard Gallagher. So Richard Gallagher.
I do know who you're talking about.
Right. So when he was writing his book on demonology, I think I'm the only medium that he's met that he actually accepted, and he I wouldn't say he wrote about me in his book, but he's inferred about me in his book, but it's not. He never mentioned me by name. But he also endorsed the work that I did, endorsed my book, and that took a lot of discussions and a lot of arguments and stuff like that, But I remember him saying to me, you're not getting any younger, Jock, and if you really want to make a splash in this world of the research work that I was doing, not only in grief but in schizophrenia, he says you really got to go down that academic path. And I thought it was too old, so I decided, you know what, I want to take it to a new level. I want to take the spiritual work that I do, blend it with the science, and see if I can develop new bridges that are not there. And so that's what I've been doing. And for me, evidential mediumship is not about just giving flippant information that anybody could gain. It's about giving veridical, empirical evidence that could essentially be measured either from, I know it's a subjective way, but it can be measured in experience, but also have an objective outlook. I also had a near-death experience that I only spoke about recently when I was doing the research at uni. And that near-death experience happened in Scotland when I had a car crash. I was working as a medium at the time, but I have to say that when I had the near-death experience during the accident, when I came back, everything had kind of tripled, and my understanding tripled, the ability that I had tripled. But at the same time, too, there was a heightened element of anxiety as well, because when you have a near-death experience and you feel that interconnectedness and you feel that the oneness, and you have that experience, and you know that life continues, you come back to the material world and you're like trying to hold on to that which you felt, and that creates a little bit of a spiritual crisis in you, and you're always searching for that feeling, and you just can't get it again, no matter what you do. And so that then took me into the realm of my spiritual crisis work and spiritual crisis research, and finding Groff's work and other people's work, and throwing myself into it. And that's kind of where I'm at today.
You're referring to Stanislav Groff's work.
Yes.
Some people will be familiar with his name and some won't.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk for a moment about your connection to that work.
Yeah. Well,
your interest.
It is it's really essentially stemmed from that near-death experience, and understanding, seeing grief is also an element of spiritual crisis. And I remember coming across Stanislav Groff's work in passing, some other people, researchers, mediums, would be talking about the holotropic breath work that he did. And he did, I mean, as you know, he did thousands of experimentation in LSD and psychedelic therapy. And I kind of looked at that, and I wasn't really drawn into that side of things, but I was drawn into the mystical experiences he was getting from breathing and the connection to spiritual crisis. And then my wife had said to me, I just come across this book that you're going to love, and you should read it. And I dove into the book, and I found it fascinating. And I studied his work even more, and I love the fact that he was a psychiatrist, that he came from Eastern Europe, and he pioneered. He really went against the grain, and he was a kind of founding. I don't want to say a founding father, but he was a founding individual in the transpersonal psychology movement. Along with others, and Assagioli and various other names that are out there. But I was more drawn to his work because of the work that I was doing in spiritual crisis, which ranged from everything from people believing they had obsessive experiences or spirit possession experiences, through to a near-death experience that they couldn't deal with, or deep grief, post-traumatic grief. And his work just fascinated me. But I also saw the weaknesses in it as well. So it's kind of, it's also taken my mediumistic interests in medium, the way that I look at mediumship is a completely different, possibly even more of a therapeutic aspect that can be used in all forms, not just losing a loved one. And it's important, I think, to make a distinction, because people think when we use the word grief, Traci, we instantly think of a lost loved one. But as you know, grief is universal, and it covers everything from losing a relationship, which can be, and we have to, could be losing your loved one, losing a relationship, losing a job, losing your own feeling of identity through psychosis. Grief is so much more, and it doesn't. The greatest myth is that you can heal from it, and the other greatest myth is that you recover from it. Neither are true.
So interesting that you say that, because I think that's going to be very hard for some people to sit with. And even every health professional that someone goes to will have a different take on grief. Family members and friends. I read a little bit of some of your blogs, and you talk about how it is very individual, and that's been my experience as well. And that, people can think like, well, this is how you're going to get through it, or how you have to get through it, or why aren't you through it yet? And I feel like it's a fine line.
Yes.
Because, your blog post was very thought-provoking for me, because I've worked with a lot of medically ill people closer to the end of their lives. I've lost a lot of people and animals in my life.
Yeah.
So sitting with grief, like I get, as a person. But there are people who will need a little more time. But at least there's some sort of progression and functioning, or lessening of depression, lessening of disbelief. But then also there are people who their functioning just continues to decline, or a year later they're not functional, or they don't really have a desire to live. And that's obviously a cause of concern and clinically significant.
Yes.
Tell me what you think about this. This is a meme, I think, that's been going around. I wish I knew who the originator was. Of course, like most memes, I don't. But, I found this helpful, that grief is something that it's not that it goes away, but your life grows around it.
Yeah, that's very poignant. In fact, one of the things that I say is, we don't recover from grief because it's not an addiction, and it's not a disease. And grief, and one of the other things that I often espouse, I say grief can be your greatest nemesis, or it can be your greatest teacher. It depends on how you accept it, and it depends on how you integrate it, and that is the key. Grief is not something that we just heal from, because it isn't a disease that we can just heal through it. It's a journey of integration, and that journey of integration is lifelong.
Yeah,
there is no stages. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, people get it mixed up, because they kind of look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages as this is where they put down this, there's a stage to grief. But the reality is we can feel all those emotions in the moment. But what they don't realize is she never really said that. She was looking at the potential from a palliative care prognosis where they knew they were dying, and so she could measure that. Whereas then everybody then took it on, and actually it wasn't really her that did it. It was, I can't remember. I think it was before that, and I've written about that in one of my articles. So there's not really any stages to it, and it becomes a lot easier when we have a deep awareness of it as being a journey and something that we integrate, because every element, grief touches every element of our lives. And even when someone says, well, I haven't lost a loved one, I've never really experienced grief, if I sat down and spoke with them and talked with them, I guarantee they've experienced grief. They just didn't understand it or have an awareness of it. So the power is in the journey and the integration. And there comes a time, though, where people who are suffering at their own hand, because essentially that's what they're doing, they cause prolonged grief disorder. They just don't see a way out. Sometimes they see that, maybe they could just take their own life and be with their loved ones, and that doesn't work like that either. And they can't live their life. And the one thing that I would say that anybody out there that's lost a loved one, and I'm not talking about pets or anything, but I'm talking about maybe siblings or parents or relations, friends, whatever. If you think that they're going to be happy on the other side watching you suffer at your own hand because you can't see it, they're not. If you really want to make them happy, then live your life and integrate the grief and let it be your greatest teacher. Let it develop your soul and your spirit so that it can teach you what it is you need to know. And the biggest thing that I think we suffer in grief is disconnection. When we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from everything. So the disconnection just doesn't come from being disconnected from the loved one, because that is the catalyst that disconnects us from ourselves and our spirit.
There's so many things going through my mind. I'm hoping I can corral my thoughts into some sort of coherent thing, but who knows? Well, fingers crossed. But, because, everything you said is so evocative.
Yeah.
For one, this kind of misconception that people have, like you were saying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages, as if it's like this linear progression and not this fluid thing where you could be feeling acceptance now and in 5 minutes feel complete denial.
Absolutely.
Or complete anger at the injustice of something, especially if you've had a traumatic loss. And I know you've talked about that in your blog too, that it's different sitting with grief when someone you love has died by suicide versus passed in their sleep. And it's not to minimize the grief of someone who has whose loved one has an easy passing, but at 99. But losing a child feels different than losing a parent for most people. But again, it's individual.
Oh, yeah.
You said something that I just want to, I wanted to talk about a little bit because, we're heading into the holidays.
Yes.
Even people who have had a few months or 6 months or a year
or years
between a loss and today can feel a reactivation of grief and loss and longing and depressive symptoms around a holiday, right? Or a challenge to their own identity. Who am I without this person? If I was this person's wife or husband or partner or child or sibling, who am I now? But this is going to be something that's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people to sit with. And let's talk about it, because you alluded to the feeling of wanting to die and join the being that you have lost. And by the way, people have that feeling with beloved pets too.
Absolutely.
100%. It's not as common, but it's, it definitely happens. But I don't think it's actually as uncommon. I think it's less talked about for people to have the thought, I kind of don't even care about being here. I wish I could be with this person or whoever.
I hear it all the time.
But I think what you're talking about is when there's no shifting around that, where that's a prolonged feeling or a feeling that intensifies. And then somebody starts to really think about it in terms of like a plan. And that's a very different and concerning situation.
Absolutely. When someone gets to that level, it's very hard to pull them back from that. It, and you really have to get, it's like they're in a well and they can't get out. And it's not the fact that you throw in a rope and you ask them to climb, is you literally have to throw in a rope, climb down and be with them and show them that the light is there. I don't normally talk about sittings that I've given because I try to keep away from the whole
Okay.
mediumship afterlife thing, because there's a lot of people that won't go for that, and there's a lot of people that are more scientifically oriented. But what I will share one story. I once was given, I gave a sit-in to an individual who their loved one came through and identified the very night and the time and the actual pills that they were about to swallow and take when they were in the bathroom. And when that came through and they realized that they were being watched, and that evidence was given, it totally changed their direction in life because they realized it wasn't the right way. But people who are maybe not attuned or not ready to hear from a loved one, they're in such a place of turmoil and suffering that they see no way out. And for me, the trick, or not the trick, but the strategy is in getting them to become aware and getting them to identify the triggers. And if I can get them to identify triggers and then change those triggers from something negative to something positive, then we have a real chance of pulling them out of that prolonged grief disorder. Some people, unfortunately, won't even react to that. And you have to then bring in clinical help. I mean, you really need to go to psychiatrists and bring in, and that's where, clinical work will actually help them, because they need to then look at maybe a medical intervention. It's not something I want to see people going in and taking drugs and going in and seeing clinical psychiatrists and being put on that, when I believe the power of the human spirit is phenomenal. The power that we have to be able to come through trauma and effectively for it to become an awakening or a self-realization of who you really are. So I feel for them. I'm very empathic with how they're feeling, but it's very difficult to deal with someone that really is there. I mean, I have dealt with it, and it's so hard to try and pull them back from it. And some people just will not listen, and they will not be seen because they think the way out is to be with them. What I have done in the past as well is given them the reality that, knowing what I know from the other side, from near-death experience, knowing what I know as my working as a professional medium for over 2 decades, they kind of get shocked when I said, you ain't going to be with your loved one the way that you think you are, because you're going to have to go through an awful lot of work to be able to get to that stage. So why not do it now? Why not do the work now, the grief work that you need to do, so that when that time comes, you'll be and the other thing that I tend to get from them is when I kind of explain to them there's no distance, no time, so that when you eventually, when you do make that crossing over, it will be that you haven't, you've not been missed and you're not missed, and it'll be that. And I have I have a grief community that I work with, and they love one of the sayings that I have. I basically tell them that your loved ones are just in the next room. They're never far away from you, and they're just waiting for you to walk through the door.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. And my disclaimer is I am not a professional medium. And I don't claim to be, and please don't try and book a reading with me,
No.
anyone. But I've had mediumistic experiences
Yeah.
on and off my whole life. I have done, I've taken mediumship trainings. Again, doesn't make me, it
No.
makes me where I am. That's
Yeah.
not my path. But I have to say, um, what you're saying rings true,
Yeah.
just about what our loved ones want for us and
Yes.
how fine they are.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I think the great irony of, most people I think who've done mediumship or professional mediums have
Yeah.
said, and this has been my experience as well, but it's for me, like it's harder to deliberately connect to the person you are desperately longing to
Yeah.
reunite with. It's much easier to connect when there's not that incredible pressure, or when
Yeah.
it's not even your loved one.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's for a reason. And I'm thinking about people I know who have really struggled with grief in the last few years.
Yeah.
And their feeling is like, well, if this isn't real, how come I'm not, receiving pennies on the floor or seeing them in my dreams every night or,
Yes.
having a million experiences? And my thought, even just as a psychologist, is because your task, like you were saying,
Yeah.
is to be in the here and now
Yeah.
and to keep living and to let your life continue to expand and honor your grief without drowning in it. And that is such a hard day-to-day balance.
It is. And I would add to that, and I would say, for those of you out there that suffer because you haven't dreamt about your loved one or you haven't had those pennies falling or anything else, and it can be quite hard when someone has a penny and they say, oh, I got a sign. There's a difference that I teach you people. When I do workshops or I do retreats, I try to tell people you don't have to come to me for a reading. And rather, I would rather support you on the journey. I want to teach you how to speak a new language. Because if you want to learn Japanese, you go and you learn Japanese and you learn how to do that language, and then you can speak that language, you become fluent in it. If I can teach you the new language, I can teach you if I can be the catalyst to you remembering who you are, the self-realization that you already know the language. If I can teach you to recognize that language once again, these signs will come to you. And you've got to realize that there's a difference between real signs from spirit and signs that are just wishful thinking, or that people have. It's like somebody puts a meme out and it goes viral and everybody thinks it's true. Your loved one's not necessarily going to float in the cloud and create a cloud in the picture or
I mean,
anything,
maybe, but
but
unlikely.
if I can teach you how to really attune and really learn that language, that's going to help you in your journey, and it's going to help you to bring that into your being, to integrate it and to understand, and to realize that they're not gone, and you can communicate just as I do. So there is a way through. And the other thing, one of the other reasons you get blocked, and I hate saying this because sometimes if anybody gets upset by it, I'm sorry. There's a deep selfishness in grief, right? We're selfish. What have I lost? How am I going to be? I cannot do anything. It's me, me, me. We need to then get to the point, well, we need to think about the loved one on the other side, how it affects the whole life, the whole environment, not just you. And once you become aware and move through that process and kind of drop the selfish aspect of it, realizing I am being selfish, that's a beginning. Anything that changes in life, as you know, as a psychologist, awareness. When we have awareness of something, we have the power for change and transformation. So work toward getting that awareness, and you'll be able to change it. And here's the thing, the grief that you're feeling, you've created an impenetrable fog, and you can't see through it. So you think that you're lost and you think you're disconnected. But the thing is, you've got to realize that the fog is always temporary, because when the sun rises, the fog dissipates. Just as divine law operates, that fog is not there. It's not impenetrable. And you can start to see through it by allowing that light to shine through. And that's just learning what it really means to communicate and feel that different language.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking a myth that people have is that they cannot go on if they don't have the ongoing relationship that they used to have with the person or the animal. And that is a myth, because we can and we're supposed to grow around it. And I'm not trying to minimize anyone whose grief is clinically significant.
No.
And feels overwhelming. And all grief, I think, feels pretty overwhelming in the beginning.
Yes.
Another myth is that when someone passes, they're gone. When you were talking about them being in the next room, for the losses I've had that are not painful now, there might be a missing, like my grandmother, her sisters, I was very close to them. I was thinking, like, God, out of 10 children in that family, only one is still alive.
Wow.
And it has changed, holidays and,
absolutely.
whom I can call on the phone and so forth. But I have often had the feeling like they are alive, because they are,
Yeah.
and in another room,
Yeah.
even though, for the most part, the connections I've had with them since they passed have been through a medium and not
Yeah.
direct. Um, and that is very comforting. And that is the transformation of the grief feeling into something that is a
Yeah.
lovely, like, it's a lovely thought. I know they're fine.
Yeah.
Um, another myth I think that people have, and I feel like it intensifies around the holidays, is, and most people aren't aware that they believe this, I think. If I allow my grief to ease and I allow myself to find joy in my life, I am betraying this person's memory. I am not doing justice to them, or I will lose my connection to them. It's
Mm.
like actually two different myths.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the clinging to the suffering
Yeah.
feels necessary.
Yeah. It's almost like a false hero complex. And the way that I would say is you shouldn't be comfortable in your own suffering, thinking that that's what they want, right? It becomes, you're doing them a favor. You're actually doing them more of a, you're developing more of a connection with them on the other side when you realize that they still want to be part of your life. They don't want to see you suffer because they want to help you guide. Like if you're, for instance, oh, shall I go on that holiday or anything else? And you're thinking, what will I do? They're probably, behind you going, you know what, Traci, yeah, I think you should go on that holiday. Let's egg you. In fact, do you remember? And they try to put things in your mind. They try to put memories in your mind of maybe a catalyst, a remembrance of where you were with that loved one. Maybe you want to go and visit that again. They still want to be part of your life. And you've got to go on and live your life because they're not gone. You can't die for the life of you. You're going to continue on. And you create your own disconnection by thinking that they're disconnected from you, or that if you allow yourself to suffer even more, they're going to love that and they're going to love you even more and think, well, they're suffering in my name. I mean, for those of you that are religious, Jesus didn't want anyone to suffer. Anybody, we don't want any, Buddha don't want people to suffer. It becomes a natural part of living. Again, it becomes a great teacher for you. Your loved ones on the other side do not want you to suffer. And like you were saying, you get a bit of comfort from going to a medium. You've been to a medium. I don't want you to go to another medium. I don't want you to keep going. That's the other thing, ladies and gentlemen. You don't need to keep going to mediums. Come and learn how you can break down that fog and learn that language and feel connected. So when I have people in retreats and workshops, I teach them to connect in different ways and to get the evidence that they require. So there's no way that you're disconnected. And if you are thinking that your loved one is seriously happy that you're suffering, you're actually causing them to suffer because they don't want to see you suffer. So think about it. If you think that you're happy and you're suffering, that's what they want, that's not. And that means you're causing them to suffer because there's a karmic relationship there.
It's an interesting way for people to think about it, right? But for people who have a hard time grasping that, think of anyone you love. Think of like a common example, though, is like your best friend or your child or your partner. When they're suffering, how do you feel? Do you feel like, well, at least you're suffering, I'm not the only? No, you feel for them, and it hurts you to see somebody suffer, anybody, but especially
Absolutely.
someone you love.
Yeah.
Your loved ones who passed do not want that for you. They
No, they
don't
don't.
feel like you're more loyal, or it's demonstrating the depth of your love that you can't go on without them. That is not what they want. And I find that there are people who, again, like you've said in your blog, if it's a traumatic loss, certain types of losses, loss of a child and so forth. In a minute, I want you to talk more about your workshops and about what people can glean from them. And also, if you had advice for people going into a holiday setting, and maybe it's the first holiday or the second holiday that they have had without someone, what are some tools for coping, whether mediumistic or otherwise?
Okay, let's jump into giving them the tools, and I don't want it to be a promotion for any workshops and things that I
No,
do.
but
I'd rather give them the tools. So here's what I would say.
you also can teach them, and we do want
I
them to
can
be
teach them,
able
and
to seek additional training.
I'm
Why not?
passionate about it. You know, here's what I've done. So recently, I've been involved in some recovery projects that we've had here. We went through Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina, and I have witnessed more death, and I've witnessed people, I've hugged people who have lost people, we've listened to their stories, and this is where I want to go, ladies and gentlemen, because if there's anything that I can tell you that will help you through the holidays, is to change the triggers. And how you change the triggers is to recognize what it is that's going to make you sad. Even if you journal it, I thought of my husband, Alan, or whatever, and the minute I thought about him, the song came on. I want you to change that narrative to telling a really good story about them, because as human beings, we're spirits having a human experience, but as human beings, we're built for storytelling. Psychology is effectively storytelling as well. And we are built to really express stories in our life. News tells stories, marketing tells stories. You're told stories every day of your life to engage with you, to get you to buy something. It's a story we're built for stories. So if you recognize that we're built for stories and we have an inherent ability that's where you need to really start to tell the stories around the holiday. Instead of feeling sad that they're not at the dinner table, or you could tell a funny story about, oh my God, when Uncle Fred tried to light a cigarette off the fairy lights when he was standing. By the way, that actually happened.
Oh my!
One of my
Don't try
family,
that.
yeah, back in Scotland, he was so drunk he was trying to actually light the. But these type of stories are the stories that change the negative triggers into something positive. And so, if the song that comes on that makes you sad, think about what aspects of that song that your loved one really loved, and what did you share with each other. Maybe there's another story will come up. I'm a big thing as well. I'm a photographer, and I do professional photography, landscape photography, and actually that's how I actually teach an element of photography in grief. And so I will say is think about capturing the image that captures your loved one and tell a story around those images, because that in its way is going to help you to embrace that connection, and it's going to help to dissipate that fog, and it's going to help you to recognize maybe that your loved one's getting closer. You might feel a tingle, you might hear something that's a synchronistic, when the music comes on. There could be another sign that you'll get this a real sign from. And here's the thing, this is what I want to teach. I teach people maybe in some workshops is your signs are built around stories. It's not that you just see a rainbow and that's it, and that's a sign for your loved one. There's a story to every sign, and that story hits you in your heart. You know it. You're able to discern that. Signs are given as part of a story, and that story you will recognize. So to really go through the holidays is become a storyteller. Sit in remembrance of your loved one and highlight those stories that made you smile, that they were stupid about, and even the arguments that you had. You know what? I had an art. I wish I hadn't done that. That was a bit stupid. He didn't burn the turkey, that kind of thing. Whatever it was, anything that you can transform to something more positive will help you get through the holidays. And the other thing that I say to people is, this is what we my wife and I, we lost our really dear close friend. I probably wrote about her in my blog, but I certainly I did a podcast about her. And to lose a friend, a pet, or anyone, you can't measure anybody's loss in any
No,
way.
you can't.
And when Sheila passed, even as a medium, I rocked our world big time. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it now, but she came out for most Christmases and spent Christmases and Thanksgivings with us. Thanksgiving's tomorrow. And she passed not so long ago. It still affects us. I'm getting emotional. It still affects us now. How will I cope with that? Well, I says, you know what, Joe, pick a present. I'm buying you a gift from Sheila this year, because she always buy you a gift, right? So what did Sheila love to do at Thanksgiving? All right, so we're going to do that. And we're going to talk and tell stories about our times. And, and last night we were chatting, it's like, we went for just before Christmas, went to New Orleans. And she bought a 475 bottle of wine, and I didn't realize what she had paid for it, and I was drinking it like it was Coke. So I was kind of wondering when I was looking at her. So, and these memories, these things is what's helping us to get through it. So we make a concerted effort when we think of things that's going to cause us suffering inside and bring emotion, is to bring that awareness to something really joyful and to do something in their memory. Go out and take a photograph that would really capture the way that they felt or what they loved. Go and do the thing that they love, even if you don't like doing it. If they like going to the opera and you really hated it, just go one day, just believe that they're there with you and talk to them in your mind that they're there. That helps you to create that connection. That helps you to build up that relationship. Because remember, they haven't gone. Your relationship's still there, and they want to be part of your life now. And there's no need for you to suffer because you're suffering at your own hand. We create our own suffering. And suffering is internal. It's not external. You bang your knee, you feel it inside of you. You don't feel it outside of you. Everything's internal. We see things with our eyes objectively, but it's internal that we feel it, and we really kind of take it on board. So that's what I would say. Coming up to the holidays, guys, get ready for some stories. Get ready for storytelling. Buy your loved one a present in their name. Do something strange and funny, or even go to their favorite place. It's hard to get away their belongings, but maybe at this Christmas time, at this holiday time, you can say, you know what, I'm going to give that gift to this friend who really liked it as a gift from my loved one to them. Makes you feel good, and I'll guarantee you, your loved ones already know, and they don't care about your material stuff anyway, but it creates that connection. And you'll be surprised at what you feel inside of you and how you start to feel and recognize the signs of them around you.
So true. First of all, I'm very sorry for your loss, because it is, and another myth is that people who do this work, either they're counselors or they're mediums or both, and as if you're not human. Like, of course you're feeling it too. And of course you have good and bad days. And of course there are times when there's that intense longing or that disbelief. But you're right. Like, there's so much more to our memories of a person or an animal than their absence physically, but also then the worst thing that you can remember. A lot of people get, and I'm human too, it's happened to me too, where it's like, if somebody was sick before they're passing, remembering that, when their whole life is so much more than that.
Much more. Think about the memories.
Much more than that. And your relationship is so much more. And it's also okay to sit with the sadness or the longing that comes up, but again, not cling to it or drown in it. We don't have to. We can breathe through it. There's no feeling that we could hold on to permanently, even if we wanted to. And we don't need to create suffering in order to be dutiful loved ones.
It's something that you said that's quite poignant as well. And I'll say you have to be authentic in your grief. Like, if you're feeling sad, don't when someone says to you, how are you feeling? Everyone else, I'm good. No. Tell them, you know what, John, I'm feeling sad today, and here's how I'm feeling. Here's how I got up in the morning. Do not hide your grief. Be authentic in it. If you're at the bank teller and the bank teller is like, and you, are you okay? You're looking a bit sad. You're going to say, no, you know what? I lost a loved one. And here's the other thing. You'll never hear me say, I know you just said it, and I accept that, but you'll never hear me say, I'm sorry for your loss. You will never hear me say that. I always reply with, tell me about him. Tell me about her. Tell me a story about them. What do you remember? I will never say I'm sorry for your loss, because I'm not. And I don't mean that to be negative. It's because there's so many things that are said glibly that we don't really understand. I want someone who's lost a loved one. In fact, I was working up in Pensacola. There's been a lot of loss and deaths up there, and I was working with Mountain Rescue. And the guy that I was working with, he had just lost his father, and I've been keeping in touch saying, so how are you doing, Adam? You know, yeah, I lost my father. And he's also been witnessing people surviving and being lost as well, but he's just lost his father as well. I remember messaging him back, and I said, Adam, I'm not going to say I'm sorry because it's not what you want to hear. What I'm going to do is the next time that we're out in the mountain and we're out on an op, I want to hear all about your dad. I want to hear the funny stories. I want to hear. And he was like, you know what? I really would love that. That makes the difference. So that's what we even when someone tells me I've lost a loved one, I'm gonna try and ignite stories in them. I want them to tell me stories. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, someone who is suffering on a grief journey, it is such a blessing for them to share with you and for you to be part of that and to be in the trenches with them. Don't just flip them off. You know, just take it on board. You know, I'm not sorry, but I really want to hear. Tell me about your son. Tell me what it is that you missed about him. Tell me something funny. You know,
Which no one does, by the way.
No.
Because everybody gets so afraid because we are so ill prepared to talk about or sit with grief, our own or other people's. And so people can sometimes distance from the person who's experiencing loss. And actually, how beautiful to say, you know, tell me, you know, what did you like to do with, you know, so and so at this time of year? What is a lovely memory you have?
You know,
how do you want to honor them this
an
year?
element of gratitude. I often say to people, if you really want to understand gratitude with spirit, it's not about saying I'm thankful for the day that I had. I'm thankful for the new car. I'm thankful for the job that I just got. That thankfulness has been said glibly. There's no power in it. If you really want to have gratitude, you want to go into the story of gratitude. If I'm sitting in Starbucks and I'm holding a coffee and I think to myself, I'm really grateful for this, I immediately become aware that I'm being glib, and then I go into the story of it. Who made it? What was their life like? How are they feeling today? Where did that bean come from? And I start to create a clairvoyant image. I build a story in my mind clairvoyantly, and I start to bring the feeling of gratitude in. I bring the spirit of gratitude in. And again, it's all about storytelling. And this is what clairvoyance is. Clairvoyance is building the story. So when you sit with someone who's grieving and you say, you know what? Tell me about there's a great friend of mine in the group, Jill, and I get her to tell me stories about Chris all the time. And when I'd given her sittings, but then we got into, you know, connecting, and it'd be, tell me about this. Tell me about the story. And when he met Aerosmith, and the more that you go into the memory and the more you build up that story, the more they're pulling away from the gremlins that are coming out at midnight, and the more they're beginning to remember the brilliant things, the great things.
And there are so many great things when we allow ourselves to not be entrapped in the distressing moments of a passing.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you your opinion on this because I'm about to say something that I think people might be annoyed with me about, but I think I might do it anyway.
Go for it.
You know, 'tis the season, and it's also Mercury going retrograde, so I'll blame it on that.
Okay.
But I have noticed, and I don't know if I am just immune to this but when someone passes, people also, I feel like this is a myth that people think those who passed want us to do. Maybe some of them do, I don't know, but is that we tend to talk about them as if they are saintly. like there was never anything irritating or anything they did that you were like, why did you do that or whatever? And I feel like remembering somebody's humanity, including the stuff that you really didn't like about them, with a bit of humor, is not only okay, but it's healthy.
Absolutely. If you think that your loved one's going to cross over and instantly become John the Baptist or Mary Magdalene, you got another thing coming. Because our personalities that we develop here are all created in memory as well. And so, you know, here's the thing. I've got to jump into a little bit of science here. The brain is not what operates us. The brain is an expression of the mind. The mind is the psychological building blocks of reality. So the mind is built around this energy, this story, how we create from that mind and from that story. And that's what that's the kind of thing I would want to focus on, is the power of your mind, the power of your will, and to take away from the material world. But remember that you've developed that personality from the memories and the experiences that you've gained here. You're not going to go over to the other side and be instantly beatified in any way. Because I've given thousands of readings, ladies and gentlemen, and pardon the French, but if your husband is a bugger here, and he's going to be a bit of a bugger over there as well until he develops. Because you're not going to go over and not have a job and not have to develop. You're still going to have to develop. And this is what I would say to people who are considering crossing over at their own hand. All answers are not given to you immediately. You will still have to. Karma is not just about what goes around or comes around. Karma is how the universe operates. And everything has a relationship to the other thing. Karma doesn't exist without the law of responsibility. Nothing resists about all these are all relational. So when you cross over to the other side, if you've done it at your own hand, you're still going to have to go through the process of developing your soul, increasing vibration, recognizing what you went through and how you can make that right before you can move on. So why make it any difficult? There's no point in get it right now and don't suffer, don't continue that suffering when you cross over, because you're going to keep that same personality. You're going to have to still work through those things. So let's do it now. Let's do so that you don't need to cross at your own hand. You can get it right now. And your loved one, they're still going to have that personality over there. The people that have come through, and even when I've been teaching it to people, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, but he really treated me bad and everything else." And I'll say, you know what, yes, but he's going to learn, he's going to develop that over there. He's going to realize, and he's going to have to go through that and make that right. This is part of maybe what people would understand that life review. But you're also going to have your own personality. You're going to keep that. And even as a medium, when people come through me, for me to give evidence, there's an element of their personality that's like the signature that I've got to say, he was like this or he was like that. Do you understand this? And build that story up. Evidential mediumship is by connecting that jigsaw, connecting that story with real evidence that's actually can be factual. And you're not instantly going to grow wings when you cross over. You're still going to have to work through it. And so's your loved ones.
We all got to keep on working through the stuff we got to work through. We're all supposed to grow in one way or another. Jock, I want to be mindful of your time, because I know you have a big presentation tomorrow that you're preparing for. I want you to talk about your workshops, your books, how people can get in touch with you. What kind of, when should people get in touch with you?
I'm quite open. People can get to me on Instagram, send me a message. I have a free community that it doesn't cost anything. You can go on my website. It's a very small community. You fill in a form. If you're on a grieving journey, you can join that community and you kind of get more direct connection with me. It hasn't been a lot happening in that community recently because we've had Helene and I've been up and down and helping with recoveries and things like that. But I have that community. You get jockbrocas.com, go to the grief group. It's free. You can join it. I do workshops wherever. I arrange workshops in my area, but also I arrange weekend retreats when I find a place to retreat, to go and retreat, and I'll work, maybe from a Thursday through to Sunday, and it's all about grief and it's all about the journey. And so I also do private retreats where people will have, I got 15 people in a group and I want to have a private retreat with you, and they have a place to go, and then I'll travel. But anywhere, I go anywhere. I teach in Florida and here in North Carolina. And next year, I was planning a big retreat here next year, but the area that has been decimated that we were going to. So I'm in the process now of looking for a new place to go and run a retreat, because what we had here has gone because of Hurricane Helene.
I'm so sorry.
But yeah, wherever people want me to go and to help them, then I will find a way. What I'm also doing is I'm going to be developing a course for people that can't travel and don't have the ability to travel. that they'll be able to come and take that, and they'll be able to come and take that course and get direct access to me and help. But also, I have a YouTube channel where there's lots and lots and lots of videos on there about grief, and I always respond to people and help them no matter what. It might take me a little while, but I will always respond to every single person who connects with me who's grieving. And I don't want you to think you need to come to me for a reading. You can come to me to learn the language, and I'll teach you how to do your own. Yes, I do readings. Yes, I do sit-ins. I do have a waiting list, but I'm more passionate about understanding the grieving journey for people and about imparting the knowledge and the wisdom that I can give to you so that you can embrace that journey and allow it to be the teacher that it should be.
So, workshops on managing grief,
Yeah.
workshops on intuition and mediumship development skills.
Yep.
Um,
Spiritual crisis workshops.
Spiritual crisis workshops,
Yeah.
lots of other things. You also have 3 books out?
I have, and I'm once I've finished this master's, I'm in the process of writing another one, which will be focused more on grief and spiritual crisis. I have 3 books. Powers of the Sixth Sense, which is about intuition and psychology, was the first book I ever wrote, and then one that I wrote about the spiritual wisdom of martial arts, because I was a martial artist for many years, and then Deadly Departed is probably the one that's most hard hitting and doesn't pull any punches about the afterlife, the dangers associated with it and the beauty associated with it as well. And I think my next book's probably going to be a lot more academic since I've gone through a great deal of change in my writing. But I'm also the founder and editor of Paranormal Daily News, which is one of the top, I would say, parapsychology and paranormal news magazines online in the world. It has actually won 3 awards.
Congratulations.
I write for a number of other magazines personally as well. I'm a columnist for Odyssey magazine in South Africa, and I write for New Dawn magazine as well on spiritual development and grief and parapsychology.
That's so great. And I'll put all your details in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm sure there's lots more for us to talk about.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm thinking some of what you've alluded to would be great for my other podcast, Curious Explorers. We get into a whole different realm.
Fantastic, yeah.
But Jock, I just wanted to thank you for being on the show. It's been lovely to connect with you.
And
I'm
you.
wishing you and yours wonderful holidays.
And you, yeah. And I'll leave everybody with this thought. The holidays is not a time to be sad about your loss. It's a time to tell the stories about your loved ones. It's not about loss. It's about their stories. Celebrate them.
And your growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you, Jock Brocas, and everyone. If you enjoyed the episode, and I know you did, please remember to like, share, follow, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And of course, until next time, be well.